Spurgeon here with RevZilla, and today I am straddling the border of Colorado and Utah, where BMW has brought us to test the new F850 GS. This is the replacement for the outgoing F800 GS, a bike which has grown quite long in the tooth. So this is a welcome replacement to that middleweight adventure line within BMW's lineup. And this is a ground up redesign. So I'm extremely excited to see how this thing handles itself. And as you can see, I've already got some dirt on this. I am missing a mirror up here. We've already had some fun. So now I want to go out and I want to share some of what we've already learned with you guys.
Hey, can you get a photo of the snow on my visor?
All right, so we're out here in Colorado and we're getting a little bit more aggressive now compared to some of the roads we were on this morning. They were a little bit of rutted out water. The guy was just like, yeah, if you like single track, you'll kind of get that in the sense that you have to ride in between the ruts, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. My biggest takeaway from this bike when we first got on it was the engine. You know, because when you're looking at the spec sheet, it doesn't look like it's making that much more power, and it's really not. And honestly, to get the power, you got to be running above 5,000 RPM is really where you want to be sitting. But the big change to the engine is they went from a 360 crank, They went from a 360 crank to a 270 crank, and it feels much smoother, much more refined. Where the old F800 engine really felt kind of like you were riding a big dirt bike, this feels a little bit more usable, actually a lot more usable on the street, but while still maintaining, you know, its off-road prowess. The other thing too with the suspension on this, I've hit a couple of good little bumps here and jumps, and I only got the bottom out one time in the front. I was surprised BMW did not add adjustability to the front fork on this, just in the fact that like every other bike in this middleweight class now has that. I think the damping on it's much more refined, and the rear gets an electronic adjustable suspension if you go with the premium package. And I think that's something to note, because really it's the only bike in class that's going to give you that. So if you're someone that doesn't want to fiddle with suspension, you know, that's an added bonus. And this also gets not just an electronic suspension, but a full electronics package, which I'll make sure to break down in the article, but you can see it mainly here on the TFT dash. I'm currently riding in Enduro Pro mode, and I do have the traction control turned completely off. I found that even with the limited slip traction control on in Enduro Pro, it was just a little bit too much interference, and I prefer to have it off completely. But everybody's different, and you definitely have plenty of options right now to fine-tune this machine the way you want it. The hardest part about this whole thing is the ergonomics for my feet. I can't get my damn right foot on my brake lever, and I can't get my left foot underneath the shift lever. And I have them both adjusted all the way up. So I would say if you're planning on getting this bike, you might have to do some modifications to that if you're planning on wearing real off-road style boots. I'm wearing the Alpine Stars Tech 7s right now, which are my favorite go-to off-road boot for the moment. So I almost had to find myself really pivoting my foot to hit that rear brake. They do have that rear brake pedal extender, but I would say just keep in mind if you're riding this thing off-road, that's almost going to be a must to be able to hit that rear brake pedal. They're trying to make this thing handle a lot more refined on-road. I mean, that's my biggest takeaway so far. It's the bike feels so much more comfortable on the street, and I think for people that are, you know, just riding roads like this, you know, some hard-packed fire roads, but the majority of the riding you're doing is really going to be on the street, I think this bike now gets a lot of the refinement that the Big Brother has. Even the electronics package, the TFT dash, I mean, there's a lot of technology that goes into this thing. I mean, look at that guy right there. He's on a Honda, and that was like a Honda Nighthawk 650. So, I mean, we're not doing anything here that's crazy challenging, but there's a lot to play on here. There's a lot to learn about. So I'm gonna go keep riding, and I'm gonna make sure to check in with you at the end. But there's a lot of this that we're just gonna have to dive into in the article too, because there's so much that BMW did to this bike.
So we just wrapped up about 190 miles with the new F850 GS, and to say that it got eventful might be a bit of an understatement. We spent about 50 miles riding through the snow after the temperature plummeted from 50 degrees down to about 30, which wouldn't have been so bad if we hadn't just done about 30 miles off-road, blasting through some stream crossings, soaking us from the waist down. So it got cold, but we definitely got some adventure out of this bike. And I think my biggest takeaway is how much BMW has improved the street ability of this motorcycle, from the technology to the suspension to just to the overall handling. You know, I think if you look at the previous generation, one of its biggest flaws was it just always felt like it was out of breath. The engine just never felt like it was really peppy enough to run long distances at highway speeds. And I think this bike definitely changes that. You know, we spent the last few, 30, 40 miles running pretty much flat out, well over the speed limit, and I never felt like I needed any more from this. So I think that was my number one takeaway. You know, I was disappointed off-road that I didn't have adjustability out of the suspension in the front. You know, it really isn't a problem when you're on the street, when you're just casually doing some of these two-track roads. But as you begin to turn the volume up, you begin to pick speed up a little bit. I would have loved to just be able to adjust some of that damping to really fine-tune the suspension so it could keep up with how we were riding these bikes. But if you're really just looking for, adventure riding, where you're looking for adventure touring with some off-road thrown in, I think this is an extremely capable motorcycle. You know, the other problem that I had was definitely with the foot controls and wanting to change some of that around. I'd love to add some protection. I did break a lever off of this and I scratched it up a little bit on the fairing. But I think all things considered, it's definitely a better motorcycle than what we saw with the F800 GS. The elephant in the room, however, is that this bike, as it sits right now, is a little over $17,000, which is going to make this probably the most expensive of the middleweight adventure bikes. And that's something I want to dive into more in the article. So at this point in time, if you want to read all the nitty-gritty on the F850 GS, as well as all of my thoughts on this bike and the F750 GS, which we rode yesterday, now is when you want to head over to Common Tread, where you can read those articles. And as always, subscribe to us on YouTube to keep up with all the content we have rolling out at RevZilla.com. I want to thank you for joining us for this first ride review of the F850 GS from BMW. I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.